Hello, and welcome to the Two-Man Booth, your weekly scheduled podcast on the crazy world of professional wrestling. With me, Jonathan.
And me, Adam. And we're going to start this week, as we always do, with the news. And the big news I think we need to talk about first is the signings to All Elite Wrestling, and particularly the signings of Pentagon Jr. and Phoenix to the promotion.
Yeah, there's been a few signings that have been announced over the last couple of days, and they're particularly two that we need to talk about. I think I'll talk about those first before we come on to the other signings that have been announced. But the absolutely most important signings that have been made, and this was broken by Chris Jericho on his Twitter, is the signings of Rey Fenix and Pentagon Jr., or Penta L0M, depending on what they call him. They are two absolutely fantastic wrestlers. They're both brothers in real life, and they're absolutely brilliant. If you've not seen Lucha Underground, then you need to check them out if you want to see what they're like before you see All Elite Wrestling. They've also been a part of Impact Wrestling as well, and they've been brilliant everywhere they've gone. They get over. Pentagon is an absolute main eventer in terms of his crossover appeal and his ability in the ring, but the best thing that Pentagon has going for him is his character work, which I think both of us would agree is out of this world, and he always is the coolest character on whatever show he's on. Phoenix is also a brilliant wrestler, as babyface has come, although until Lucha Underground this season, we always thought that was obvious. He's brilliant, he's great in the ring, he is as good at using the ropes in the ring as anyone that we've ever seen, and these are two unbelievable signings for AEW.
Yeah, Jericho kind of made it sound like there were exclusive deals, and I think we've later found out that that is not the case, at least for the foreseeable. It may be something that becomes exclusive with time, but because they've got contracts that are still ongoing with Lucha Underground, with MLW, with Impact up to a certain date, there was no way that they could be exclusive with All Elite. Whether that's something when those contracts expire, if All Elite is a success, we see them as exclusive deals. I would imagine that would be the case, but it's something we don't know yet. But yeah, two massive pickups for All Elite. Pentagon in particular, as you've mentioned, he has the charisma and the star power that just, it transcends sort of the independent scene and will make him a megastar wherever he is. They've also picked up Best Friends this week and signed Kylie Ray for their women's division, so there's been a few good pickups for them this week. Have you got any thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I think they're pretty good signings. Best Friends have been one of my favourite lower card tag teams on the independent scene for quite some time. They're great baby faces. They get over everywhere they go. They've had a pretty good run in New Japan as of late. Not doing all the big shows necessarily, but maybe the littler shows they've been really good on, really productive and getting over.
Given we're talking about AEW and signings, I think the next thing to come on to is Brock Lesnar. We know from the news that's come out this week that he is currently negotiating with 3 different parties: the WWE, UFC, and All Elite Wrestling. Now, whether this is just a power play on Paul and Brock's part, I don't know. Whether it's a way to squeeze more money out of UFC and WWE. Nobody's been smarter at getting as much money for their own services over the past few years as Brock Lesnar. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, but if All Elite are genuinely in the hunt for Brock Lesnar, that's huge.
Yeah, we know that Brock has used money before as a leverage and used other companies, particularly his relationship with UFC, in order to gain more and more money out of WWE. It does, though, at the same time, the fact that AEW are even in this conversation says a lot about how they're being looked at by the rest of the industry, and it's mainly a reason why WWE are going to have to take them seriously, because if they're going to be in for these big names, they are going to be taken seriously really quickly. It does also show, and people have said this, that this is not an insult towards Brock, but Brock is about the money. And if AEW are going to offer him the money that WWE may not, then that's going to be something that Brock's going to be open to. You know, what we found out this week as well was that Jericho's contract, supposedly, and the number that he's actually managed to get has fed through into WWE's locker room. And supposedly it's not Brock money and it's not Cena money, but Dave Meltzer did report, and he wasn't sure, but he said it may be Ronda money. But even if it's not Ronda money, it's certainly more than Jericho was making before in WWE, and it's more than a lot of the boys in the locker room are making. So I think a lot of them will look at that and, they've got to feed their families. So I think a lot of them will look at that as well.
Definitely agree. And I think one thing we do need to touch upon, which we usually cover at the end of the WWE shows, but I think we need to talk about viewership for this week because that's a huge story this week. And like I say, we would usually cover it at the end of Raw, but we didn't when we did our Rumble podcast earlier this week. And we will come on and talk about SmackDown, but I thought we'd just lump it all together and talk about the viewership now. These are two really bad numbers that have come out this week. I was looking historically at the post-Rumble Raw show. In 2013, they drew 5 million viewers for the post-Rumble show.
2013?
2013.
Wow.
This year, they drew 2.7 million. So in 6 years, their audience is almost halved for the post-Rumble show.
Remind me what happened coming out of that Rumble, though. I can't quite remember.
Well, it was a major storyline at the time because that would have been just after Punk Rock. Punk Rock would have been at the Rumble. So don't get me wrong.
Draws.
Yeah. There would have been a major storyline we're heading towards twice in a lifetime. So it was maybe more star-filled, but still going from 5 million. And there's been a constant decline year on year. And this year is just probably the worst of a bad bunch because this year the bounce back wasn't as strong as it usually is either. There was only, I think, a 10% increase over last week's show, which for a post-Rumble, which is usually probably your second highest rated Raw of the year after the Raw After Mania, it's not a good number.
This is what happens, though, when your product slowly declines year on year. This is just a result of their short-sighted booking that they've been doing for the last several years. So, although it's a shock, it is certainly not a surprise.
And SmackDown's number wasn't good either. They drew 2.1 million, which is not as much of a decline if you're looking from 2013. I think they drew 3 million, so it's not as big a decline. But SmackDown's now a totally different show to what it was in terms of it is now its own brand again, which it wasn't in 2013. And also, the number dropped from the Go Home show. So they drew less for their post-Rumble show than they did for the Go Home show, which is not great.
One thing that I did see someone mention, though, regarding their number that they drew, was that the one thing that you really would have tuned in to SmackDown to see was who was Becky going to choose. And they did that on Raw, so there wasn't really that much to tune in for to see on SmackDown.
True, but you would expect if it's a brand carrying itself, you've got to be
going to get a spike. Yeah,
like these are not good numbers for WWE, and especially when you look at SmackDown. Like SmackDown's number on its own probably isn't as bad as Raw's, but when you look at it in the context of they're going to Fox in October, that is a horrible number. And the last bit of news we've got to cover this week is the sale of Pro Wrestling Noah to Lidit Entertainment. They've purchased a 75% stake in the company, and I know you've taken a particular interest in this with your interest in Japanese wrestling.
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on it. The main thing that I'll talk about is what's been reported by someone that I follow on Twitter, HI5AMA. I assume it's pronounced very differently to that, but that's, if you want to go on Twitter, that's where you find him. He's fantastic for all of his Pro Wrestling Noah news. He reported as well several things about what's going to happen to Pro Wrestling Noah afterwards. The main thing, and it's quite a sad thing really, is that supposedly they want to rebrand Noah a little bit, and that the classic green ring, which is very much associated with Mitsuharu Misawa, who started Pro Wrestling Noah in the year 2000, that green ring is going to disappear, unfortunately. It is going to be used for bigger shows, particularly the Mitsuharu Misawa memorial shows that they do, so it's still going to be around, but there's going to be a little bit of a rebrand. There was also a mention of Kenta regarding his leaving WWE, and he did mention that supposedly around in Japan it's doing the rounds that he's only been granted his release because he's promised WWE that he's going back to Japan rather than going to AEW or staying in America.
I wonder if that contractual sort of obligation in terms of him going back to Japan rules out New Japan as well. Because if I'm WWE and I'm seeing the two things I'm most concerned about from a competitor standpoint is AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling. So I wonder if there is an element of you are going back to Pro Wrestling Noah if we grant you this release. And I wonder if that's what the agreement is.
Quite possibly. I think Kenta will probably go for that. He'll be a draw for Noah. He was never a massive draw though when he was there. When they put the belt on him, he wasn't as much of a draw as you would have thought. But still, it will get some fans back in, and we mentioned just before we started the show that we'd love to see a Kenta and Naomichi Marufuji reunion as a tag team.
Love Kenta Fuji.
Exactly, yeah, we'd love to see that. But yeah, I think that might be what's going to happen. But big changes going on with Pro Wrestling Noah, so we'll keep you up to date with what happens regarding their future this year.
And I think that does it for the news this week, so we will move on to our recap of this week's SmackDown. I enjoyed the show. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I really liked it. SmackDown, although it gains much lower ratings, I always enjoy SmackDown much more than Raw, and that's not simply because it's 1 hour shorter. That is a part of it, but it's not because of that. It's because on the whole, it's a better written show, and it's better booked, and I enjoy it, and the characters act more like real people on that show. So yeah, I really enjoyed SmackDown.
So we opened SmackDown with The Man, and she was still selling the leg, which I loved. She basically said she's proud of coming from nothing, and nobody has ever handed her anything. Charlotte came out and sort of took credit for teaching Becky what she needed to know to get to this point. She said she was happy for her. I didn't quite buy that. And neither does Becky, and she punched Charlotte in the face. So Becky then left the ring, and Charlotte attacked her on the ramp, and we got a brawl. And it was a fine opening segment. I guess this is how we start to segue into Charlotte being inserted into this match at Mania, which kind of disappoints me, but the segment as itself was kind of fine.
Yeah, the segment did what it needed to do. Becky had already made her announcement the night before, so she came out super hot off that. She's hot every single SmackDown or Raw that she comes out on. She's the biggest star in professional wrestling at the moment. Fine segment, no problem with it. I do think we do need to see whether that's going to be the segue into Charlotte as part of the Mania match or Charlotte as Becky's little mini feud before WrestleMania. Because as we've mentioned, Charlotte is not needed in that match. She'll be fine if she's in there, but she's not needed. And some people have spoken about whether Charlotte goes against Asuka and we end WrestleMania, and I'd love to see this, but we end WrestleMania with all 4 horsewomen in the ring together, all holding titles.
And that I'd never really thought of, because Sasha and Bayley could be the women's tag team champions by that. Very interesting.
And I hadn't thought of it either until someone mentioned it on Twitter the other day. I can't remember who it was, so sorry that I can't give them credit, but I thought that would be it'd be almost like Benoit and Eddie. That great, obviously it's very tainted now, but that great visual where they ended WrestleMania celebrating together. I think that would be really interesting as an end to WrestleMania.
So we then moved on to a little bit of weirdness on SmackDown this week. The next match was R-Truth versus Shinsuke Nakamura for the United States Championship. Short match. Nakamura went for the landslide, but R-Truth countered into a small package. Nakamura kicked out at 2.5 or whatever it was, but the ref counts to 3 anyway. So we've got a new champ. Rusev then came out. He said he took the title from Nakamura because it deserved better, and it definitely deserves better than Truth. Carmella and Lana then sort of got into a little bit of a scrap, and then Rusev shoved Truth down. So I guess Rusev has turned heel too. I mean, this happened with Elias, where he was just sort of at the Rumble, he was randomly a heel. Now Rusev on SmackDown's randomly a heel.
What Dana has must be infectious. It's catching on. People just turn not on there. It would be nice to know when people are good guys and bad guys, though. It would be nice to know.
And then we had R-Truth versus Rusev, with R-Truth defending the title he just won. This was even shorter, and once we got back from commercial break, Truth basically got a roll-up for 3. Guessing Rusev was meant to kick out before 3 as well. That was the feeling I got watching it, but he didn't. It was almost like the commentators had to cover for the fact that they weren't telling the story they expected to tell. So I don't know what story they're going for here. Referee incompetence? Yeah. I have no idea.
Referee incompetence has been something that's been on Raw, So we have seen that, but this was just odd. I have no idea where they're going with this. They are week after week devaluing that United States title more and more and more by hot-shotting it like this. I think Truth's great, and we've spoken about how he's the ideal mid-carder. Why does he need this title? But then again, if you're going to put the title on him, I have no problem with that, but do it in a better way. It made no sense.
So Nakamura then attacked Truth after that, and Rusev then joined in, and both of them beat Truth up. Nakamura held Truth up for the Machka kick from Rusev, and then Rusev repaid the favour and held him up so Nakamura could hit the Kinshasa.
So even though Rusev has hated Nakamura for being involved in some confrontations with his actual wife, I guess it's sort of now the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Even though Rusev really has no real reason to hate Truth, he's just got the title that he lost. Makes very little sense.
So we then had Becky walking backstage, and she was accosted by Kayla Braxton, and She basically asked her why she wasn't going to go to the doctors, and Becky said she'd spent enough time on the shelf. This felt very Austin-esque.
Yeah, we said this, didn't we, when we were talking after we'd both seen the show. It did really feel like Austin, and it just put over how gutsy Becky is, and it's the most babyface thing ever. You know, I've been put on the shelf once, you've ignored me before, I'm not giving you an excuse to do it now. Yeah, I may be hurt, but I'll be fine come WrestleMania. Just perfect. The way that they may book things inconsistently and not well at times, but I must say the way that they're booking Becky Lynch at the moment is absolute perfection.
Agreed, yeah. So the next segment saw Rey Mysterio out for a match, but then Zelina Vega came out and said that Rey got her banned from ringside last week. It would have been nice if commentary had mentioned that last week or something like that, because I was like, did he?
Yeah. Why don't...
Yeah. It's like they tell half a story. But anyway, so Andrade attacked Rey from behind. He went for the Three Amigos on Rey, which got some good heat from the crowd. But Rey blocked the third and then attempted a 619, but Andrade elbowed him as he was on his way in for the 619. And a hammerlock DDT puts Rey down. This was a fine segment to continue their feud.
Yeah, it's building towards something, and I have no problem watching them wrestle more and more and more. I really don't. I'm interested to see how much longevity this feud actually has. Whether they can stretch it out till Mania, I'm not sure they can. But either way, I'm really enjoying it. And like I said, watching them wrestle each other more and more, I have no complaints with that.
We then had a couple of missing people turn up in Carl Anderson and Luke Gallows, having not been seen since we were promised a shake-up and they were on that one SmackDown.
Is that how long it's been?
Yeah. They hadn't been seen for months, and then the McMahons promised to shake things up, and then both them and Sanity were on that 1 or 2 episodes of SmackDown, and then both them and Sanity then just disappeared again. Yeah.
I had no idea it had been that long. Mm-hmm. Dear me.
So they confronted Rusev backstage about attacking Truth. Nakamura interrupted, and long story short, we're getting Anderson and Gallows versus Rusev and Nakamura. I thought it was for this show when I was watching it, but then the match didn't happen, so I assume this is for next week. I may have just missed the mention in that, but I was waiting for it later on in the show, and it never happened. And then Rusev basically tells Nakamura that this is a one-time thing and not to screw him. So I'm expecting Nakamura to screw him.
So that does explain a little bit what I was talking about then. That does explain it a little bit. I'd forgotten about that segment. Yeah. The only thing is, why do Gallows and Anderson have any real reason to care about this?
I know it's not WWE canon or whatever you want to call it, but I found it really, really funny that you've got Luke Gallows and Carl Anderson of the original Bullet Club complaining about a 2-on-1 on somebody. It just made us chuckle. So we then went to the Miz and Shane in-ring tag team title celebration. This was weird.
They're trying so hard to go so babyface, and sometimes it works, but more often than not, it sort of takes you back to like the early 90s where people refused to accept that wrestling had changed.
So Shane wants to repay Miz and promises Miz will never forget this night for the rest of his life. I swear to God, when he said that line, I was like, oh my God, he's turning.
I thought you were going to say, this is your life.
No, when he said, this is going to be a night you'll never forget, I was like, Shane's turning on Miz. Good God almighty, why? But that didn't happen. We get a video recapping Miz and Shane's story. Shane introduces Miz's dad. Miz's dad is now proud of him. Some father, that is, but never mind. So Shane announces Miz and him defending the titles at Elimination Chamber against the winners of a 4-way elimination match that is coming next. It did its job. It went on probably too long, and I kind of feel like Miz's dad's the biggest deal in the business, but apart from that, it was fine.
Yeah, it's cringy, and like I said, they're trying so hard to be so babyface, it actually comes off very, very lame. But it did what it needed to do, I guess. But like, yeah, you're totally right. It went way too long.
So we then had the feud that will never die. Then we had Mandy and Sonya backstage. Pretty sure they just entered themselves into elimination. The tag team title elimination chamber match. I'm pretty sure they just announced they were in it, which is really weird because the girls on Raw had to qualify. So.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking that, yeah.
Yeah. So they show some footage from Tough Enough, which was a little bit too shooty for me. I kind of didn't like it.
For me, it was more like they were stretching to find a reason for this feud to actually exist.
Apparently this hurt Mandy so much she cried constantly and her boyfriend broke up with her, so she wanted to ruin Naomi's relationship in revenge. The interviewer mentioned that Mandy failed and Jimmy and Naomi are stronger than ever, and Mandy corrects her by saying she has failed so far. confirmation that this inane rubbish will continue. Joy.
Just watch this be on the WrestleMania card.
Imagine if this is on the WrestleMania card and the Cruiserweight title match is on the pre-show. I will just lose my mind.
Yeah.
So we then had the 4-way elimination match to set up Shane and Miz's tag team challenges for Elimination Chamber. This was the Usos versus The Bar versus The New Day versus Heavy Machinery. So it was actually a lot of fun. Heavy Machinery are not over yet. Graves was insufferable in this match on commentary. All he was doing was talking about Mandy, and I was just like... I remember when Corey Graves was on NXT, he was my favourite commentator in the world. I think in my end of the year awards, I think I gave him commentator of the year like 3 years in a row.
Yeah, because he deserves it each time.
At times, he is utterly insufferable at the minute.
Oh, he's dreadful. Because he refuses to actually talk about what's going on. And he makes so many stupid insider references.
He's almost Matt Striker level of bad sometimes.
But it's also that he just has random conversations about things that don't actually exist in the world. Like the other week when he started talking to Cole about Sarah Logan's wedding. In theory, that doesn't really exist in the world of professional wrestling. Why are you talking about it? Because it's non-kayfabe. Yeah. I'm starting to really... Every time Graves says something, I'm like, oh,
you know what? Sometimes he's still sometimes really, really good.
Sometimes.
And that's why it's infuriating, because you know that great commentator's still in there, but he's just not performing.
I just wonder if it's because Vince is in his ear.
Yeah, you've got to think that everybody gets worse on the main roster. Anyway, eventually it breaks down, leading to Heavy Machinery hitting the compactor on Kofi for the elimination of the New Day. The Bar lay waste to both Usos either side of an ad break. Otis then got a hot tag and destroyed both members of the Bar, including hitting the Caterpillar, which did get a reaction. The only thing Heavy Machinery did that did get a reaction. Cesaro kicks out though. Jimmy was alive, so he got a 2 count on Tucker, and then Sheamus blind tagged Jimmy, and the Brogue Kick gets the 3 on Tucker Knight, which eliminates Heavy Machinery. One Uso then dives onto Cesaro, the other hits the Superfly Splash on Sheamus for the win, and good luck to the Usos trying to get a good match out of Miz and Shane at the Elimination Chamber.
Yeah, that should be fairly rough. I would really hope that Usos win, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think Miz and Shane are going to be champs going into WrestleMania, unfortunately.
So we then had our main event segment of the week. Brian came out and says everybody and their children won at the Rumble because he won and he is the planet's champion.
More than The Rock. He's literally above The Rock now. The Rock was the people's champion. He's literally the world champion.
He doesn't expect the fans to understand, but he found an intellectual peer in Rowan. Brian says AJ was right to call Brian a hypocrite because Brian carries around a symbol of excess. The title was made from a cow that suffered immense pain. That cow's name was Daisy. Brian puts the WWE Championship in the bin and Rowan unveils the new 100% hemp championship. AJ comes out and asks if Brian had smoked the prototype. It was an interesting line on a WWE show.
PG.
Orton, Jeff Hardy and Mustafa Ali all took turns interrupting. Orton mocks Ali for being eliminated by a girl, which just made me roll my eyes so hard.
They've booked him so well up until this point, don't ruin it.
It was just the way Orton dismissively went, you got eliminated by a girl. I thought, what is this, like,
Women.
when you're 6-year-old?
Women's evolution. Trademark.
Yeah. So, anyway, Joe then came out, and this is where it got really good. Joe came out and got a killer promo. My favourite line in this was he tells Jeff to pretend this is an AA meeting and shut up while he's sharing with the group. I laughed so hard.
Oh, it was so good. Line of the week, possibly.
But he was laying waste to everybody. He asks AJ how Wendy is doing, and then everybody brawls. Brian stands on the announce table and says not one of these people will get a shot at him. And Hunter comes on the Titantron and agrees with Brian. Not one of these people will. All of these people will. Inside Elimination Chamber. Brian screams no as the crowd chants yes.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that Brian actually did start doing no. Even when they've been doing yes at him so far, he hasn't resorted to doing the no. Yeah, this was a very interesting segment. I love the title. I think it's quite possibly the best custom title that they've ever done because it just fits the character so well. It looks ridiculous as well. It looks terrible, but because it's Brian's, I think it's really cool. The rest of it was absolutely fine. There was some odd bits, but on the whole, it did what it had to do. We've got an Elimination Chamber, and every single person that's in that chamber is a good worker at the very least. So we should be in for one of the better Elimination Chamber matches that we've ever seen. So yeah, no complaints. Good segment, did what I had to do. But like we said, there was nothing on this SmackDown that was out of this world exciting. It was just a solid episode.
And I think one thing we need to mention is, obviously we do our segment of the week every week. Do we give that to Becky and Ronda's promo on Raw the bit after the match? Because I was looking at SmackDown and NXT and 205 Live to see if anything stood out. And to be honest, nothing really compared to the promo they did post-match. I know it'll be a little bit tainted by some people with Ronda's awful promo before the match, but the promo they did after she'd had a match with Bayley, with her and Becky, was absolutely phenomenal. So as long as you're in agreement, I think we give that our segment of the week.
Yeah, that segment of the week. Obviously, despite what happened before, I think what you came out of that segment thinking was, wow, I cannot wait to see this match at WrestleMania. So therefore, it was great. And like we said on the last episode, great promo, great segment, fantastic.
So with that, I think we'll move on to NXT. This was a heavy recap show, but we did open with a match, which was Io Shirai and Kairi Sane against Jessamine Duke and Marina Shafir. This was a decent match considering the lack of experience of Jessamine and Marina. Shirai hit a really nice version of a Shiranawu before getting the hot tag to Sane. She was basically like, I think it was Marina had her in like a dragon sleeper, and she sort of walked up the ropes in the way to hitting sliced bread number 2, if you want to call it that instead. But it was really nice. And then she got the hot tag, like I said, to Kairi. Io pops Kairi up so she can hit an elbow drop. So it was like an assisted elbow drop. And then she dove onto Duke on the outside. And Sane hit the insane elbow for the win. A good showing for this tag team. I really like them as a tag team. I really wouldn't be opposed to them being a surprise team in the Elimination Chamber. If I would be honest, I don't think it'll happen.
They need good workers in there, because there are some people in that chamber that are not good workers.
No.
So they could do with it.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea, but whether they do it or not is another matter. We then got a recap of the Gargano-Ricochet match. We then got a promo from Gargano talking about how he is Johnny Takeover. He delivered a match of the year and he won. Winning feels great. Johnny's at the dark side.
Because everything's about wins and championships.
And what did Johnny do at Takeover?
He won, and he won a championship. And he reunited with his best friend.
We then got a recap of the women's Takeover match. We get an interview with Bianca afterwards. She says undefeated is a mindset, so in her mind she is still undefeated. Apparently Sam Roberts said on the Takeover kickoff show that this was a waste of a title match because Bianca wasn't on Shayna's level, and Bianca basically buried Roberts for that. And I'm glad she did, because that is an insanely stupid thing to say on a kickoff show.
Yeah, I can't believe he actually said that when you're trying to sell for people to watch the pay-per-view.
I didn't see the Takeover kickoff show, but when I heard that promo, I was like, really?
He must have said it for Bianca to actually reference it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a waste of a match. Bianca's a very promising young wrestler. So I totally disagree with Sam Roberts there. Totally disagree.
So we then had a recap of the Tag Team Championship match from TakeOver. War Raiders talk about how Undisputed Era gained their respect, but their era is over. We then got a recap of Ono and Riddle. We got a typical Riddle promo afterwards. He broke Ono, and if anyone else wants to step to him, he will break them too. And then we got the sort of the highlight of the highlights, if you like, where they did a very nice NXT Championship recap, which felt a lot more dramatic than the rest of them and took up a larger portion of the show. We then recapped Halftime Heat, and then we recapped all of the NXT guys and girls that were in the Royal Rumble. We then got to our main event, which was the Forgotten Sons versus the Street Profits. This was a fine match. Montez Ford showed off his crazy vertical leap again with just an insane tope con holo. I don't think I've seen anybody get as high in the air on a tope con holo as he did.
Clear the rope by that far.
And you know what? I think he could have had 6 ropes there. He would have still cleared it. It was insane. Much the same as these Frog Splash from a few weeks ago on TV. It was just, that man's got some leaps. Anyway, the finish came with a reverse DDT double stomp combo from Forgotten Sons picking up the win over the Street Profits, and commentary kind of pushed them hard, so it made me think, are they maybe the next challengers for War Raiders?
Quite possibly, and this was fine. Did what it had to do, and ended what was very much a recap, but a solid recap episode of NXT. It wasn't there to add anything necessarily new. It was there to just build on and recap what had happened at TakeOver.
Which is what they do after every TakeOver, so we expected no more. We got 2 decent tag matches. There was some nice interviews to go with the recaps. I think this was a fine show.
Yeah. I rarely ever complain about NXT anyway. It's always solid. It's always great. So let's now start and really look forward to TakeOver at Mania weekend. So
with that, we will move on to 205 Live. We opened this show with Kalisto versus Mike Kanellis. The story here was that Mike and Maria are sick of being overlooked. Kanellis is extra aggressive in this match. Aiden English and Maria Kanellis' arguing on commentary was insipid. It almost like... I'm not a massive Mike Kanellis fan, and I think Kalisto is good, but I don't really care about him all that much. But they were in the ring actually having a really good match, and I just couldn't focus on it because of the incessant arguing between those two. It was awful. I ended up muting the TV to watch the end of the match because I just couldn't stand it anymore.
I don't know what's happened to commentary as a whole in WWE. And NXT get it right, but commentary as a whole in WWE, the rest of it, has just become insipid, and I would rather watch it on mute, but for the purposes of what we do, a lot of the time I actually actively listen to it, which makes me more and more angry.
Well, I just took the decision to mute it this time.
I do not blame you.
Yeah. So there was some nice work in the match though. Kanellis hit a lovely top rope side effect and a series of nice vertical suplexes and a nice backpack stunner. Mike's uber aggressiveness cost him in the end though when he went for a powerbomb, but Kalisto rolled him up for the win. We then cut backstage where Drew Gulak and Jack Gallagher cut a promo welcoming Humberto Carrillo to 205 Live, saying he doesn't have to do all this flying because they can show him the way for a better 205 Live. I guess Carrillo versus Gulak and Gallagher is going to be sort of his first feud. It should be fun.
That'll be cool,
good
actually.
Good entrance for him, yeah.
Yeah, I really, I've said this before, I'm really quite a big fan of Gulak and his character and the way that he works in the ring. And Gallagher's a great addition to him as well. I think this will be really interesting, and we'll see where we go moving forward.
So we then went to Arya Daivari and Hideo Itami, who cut a backstage promo claiming that Buddy Murphy was lucky to escape with his title on Sunday. Arya says Itami has run through all his opponents and will do the same thing to Tozawa tonight. We then got footage from early which saw Tony Nese attack Noam Dar in the parking lot. Nese destroyed Dar until officials and wrestlers broke things up. We got an update which noted that Dar is not seriously injured, but Nese has been suspended. An interviewer then asked Buddy Murphy about the situation, and he said legally he cannot approve of what Nese did, but is he unhappy with him? He kind of just left that question hanging. So I don't know whether we may be seeing something to do with Dar getting a win over Nese in their sort of rubber match, and then we see Nese Murphy. It's not something, not Nese Murphy, Dar Murphy. It's not something I'm massively looking forward to, but that seemed to be where they were going with this segment.
Like we've said as well, Murphy's title reign is starting to slow down a little bit, only purely because he's now running out of challenges.
Yeah.
So I think he almost needs filler defences on 205 Live to keep him going for a little bit until Mania. They need to pretty much just keep him going for a little bit until Mania, keep him as hot as possible.
They need to set up somebody to take the title from him, though.
That's what I mean.
I'm looking at the 205 Live roster and I'm going, apart from maybe Akira Tozawa, who's just dropped a fall in... Well, he didn't drop the fall, but he was in the match and did not win at the Rumble. Who is there that stands out as somebody who's going to take that title from him? That's
what I mean. They need to keep the belt on him. In the meantime, they need to really focus on who they're going to build up, whether they're going to call somebody up, and who's pretty major down in NXT or NXT UK, and sort of give them a bit of a super push. I don't know, but they really need to think about that, because otherwise 205 Live is going to end up a bit rudderless, and we both really like 205 Live.
Yeah.
But it'll end up rudderless if Murphy's just champ with no direction and nowhere to go.
So we then went on to our main event of this show, which was Akira Tozawa versus Hideo Itami. This was a ton of fun. Itami hit a discus lariat during this match, which nearly decapitated Tozawa. It was awesome. Hideo went for his finisher, but Tozawa reversed it into a version of the Trouble in Paradise. Daivari went for another distraction as he'd been doing throughout the match, but Itami accidentally hit him, taking him out. Tozawa then hit a German and hit a senton for the 3. Post-match, Kendrick and Tozawa celebrated, and then when they left the ring, Daivari helped Itami to his feet, and then he levelled him with a lariat. I guess that's Itami's last WWE show.
Yeah, Daivari needed to do something in order to sort of split him off from Itami, so that makes sense. We'll see where Daivari goes. I'm not a massive lover of his, but, give him a shot, see if he gets over.
And he might as well get some heat from Itami if Itami's leaving.
He needs to sort his look out, though. I think his look's dreadful. He's still be wearing those white trousers, hasn't he? And
yeah.
It looks very weird. It looks almost kind of like he's in Scarface. It's a strange look.
So we then move on to any other business, I think. Do you want to start with the New Japan New Beginning shows?
Yeah. I think the main thing coming out of those shows is that nothing massive has actually happened yet. There's been a lot of continuation of what's sort of been happening. There's been no title changes really, so everything's kind of continued. Naito retained the IC title over Taichi. Evil and Sonata retained the tag titles. So everything's kind of continued as normal. The only thing I will mention about the tag titles is that it was very interesting that Evil and Sonata pinned Minoru Suzuki rather than Zack Sabre Jr. I find that very interesting, and because we've talked about the fact that Sabre may be in for a big year, I think that's probably an indicator that that's true, because in terms of where they're positioned on the card, Minoru Suzuki is higher than Zack Sabre Jr., so that will be very interesting to see moving forward. And then I'll hand over to you for the rest of the recap.
Yeah, so you've covered most of the points, I think. The only big thing from the US shows was that Juice retained the US Heavyweight Championship against Trent in the main event of, I believe it was the North Carolina show, but don't quote us on that. With the sort of shows in Sapporo, obviously it was a good day for LIJ on the second day, which was just aired this morning, which was sort of Naito retaining against Taichi in the main event. I thought they made Naito look like an absolute star in that match, having Taichi basically take him out during his entrance, and sort of everybody beat him down, and then Naito coming back out from the back against Doctor's orders and fighting back. They made Naito look like a superhero, and you know what? It actually created some drama for the match, because nobody in their right mind thought Taichi was beating Naito. But because they did all that work before the match, it was almost like, wow, is this how they get around it and get the belt onto Taichi? So it was really well done. But like I said, good day for LIJ, because prior to that, Evil and Sonata had retained their heavyweight tag titles, and the match prior to that, Bushi and Takagi had retained their junior heavyweight tag titles. So sort of a triple main event for LIJ, and they retained all the belts.
Yeah, and one thing I will also mention is regarding the American shows that they've done. On the whole, not consistently across the board, but it does appear that they've drawn pretty well. There's a lot of no vacancies. There's no super no vacancy, but all the attendances suggest that it's no vacancy, the vast majority of them. So that would appear that they've drawn, on the whole, pretty well for what, considering, were pretty poor cards.
I think, had they already sold the tickets for the shows before the cards were announced?
Quite possibly,
yeah.
So that may be something to do with it, because I can't imagine lots of people coming out in massive groups to see those cards. They're pretty poor.
Yeah, but it does speak well to the fact that they are able to draw new areas as well, even if it was based on the idea of the New Japan guys being there, which I think we knew not many of them would be, because they were running the shows at roughly the same time they were running the New Beginning shows in Japan. But it is a good indicator for New Japan anyway.
One thing we do need to talk about, and one thing that I did forget to mention earlier as well, was that on night one of the New Beginning shows, the main event was Jay White tagging with Fale against the superhero tag team of Okada and Tanahashi. You would think logically that the guy that would be taking the loss there would be Bad Luck Fale, but in their now what would appear to be pretty strong push of Jay White, and we did predict he was having a massive year, Jay White won that match by actually submitting Tanahashi by using a reverse figure four. So that's very interesting. That would suggest that Jay may well be losing though, and that's their way of giving him a bit of a rub before he then loses the title match.
Yeah, and that's the one show we've got left from New Beginners in Osaka, which is headlined by Jay White challenging Hiroshi Tanahashi for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. So that'll be interesting to see what happens there. But with that, I think we've covered everything New Japan related, apart from the one thing we haven't mentioned, which was Kushida's sort of departure from the company. I nearly said retirement there. Kushida's departure from the company. He had a match which he's always wanted against Hiroshi Tanahashi. I thought it was a very good match. Not great, but very good. They worked a very sort of mat-based style. It was a very interesting match. And post-match was where the most interesting thing happened, because Jay White came down, got some mega heat by taking out both guys. Or taking out Tanahashi. Did he take out both guys?
I think Kushida was already down. But again, don't quote me on that, because I saw it about a week ago.
Yeah. But after that, we got the nice send-off for Kushida anyway. Once Jay White got his heat and got out of there, we got a nice send-off for Kushida. And I thought there was one interesting line from Kevin Kelly on commentary where he said, well, we say goodbye to Kushida for now. I'm sure we'll be seeing him soon. Even Kevin Kelly has no faith in WWE's booking.
Yeah, I don't blame him. In NXT, the booking would be great, and probably if he went to 205 Live, he'd probably be absolutely huge in 205 Live, but as soon as he got to the main roster, I think they'd have no idea what to do with him, so we shall see.
So the ROH shows that we talked about on last week's show, we didn't mention because we didn't have time during the Rumble, and we didn't do sort of any other business segment during that Rumble podcast. But the only main takeaway really from those ROH shows was that Brody King and PCO of Villain Enterprises won Tag Wars, and they will be challenging the Briscoes at the anniversary show.
That'll be very, very, very interesting and very entertaining, that.
Yeah, and probably very violent as well.
And PCO, let's just hope he's okay.
So I think the last thing we need to mention in any other business is the fact that Pro Wrestling Guerrilla have announced their 200th card, which they have entitled 200.
Yeah, that's the most original thing ever. And it's ironically, it's the most non-PWG thing ever, because all of their shows have always had really cool names like Black Coal Sun and things like that, things that sort of are taken away from like song lyrics or things like that, and to just literally just call it 200 is both the least and the most PWG thing ever.
Because they do stuff like that as well, where they'll just name something untitled or 10 because it's their 10th anniversary.
We can't think of a name.
Yeah. Anyway, so the card for that, we open with a three-way match between Jake Atlas, Jungle Boy and Trey Miguel. There'll be a singles match between Laredo Kid and Puma King. We then have a tag team match between Aussie Open and Best Friends, which is really interesting. Aussie Open, I believe one of them's been in PWG before, but it was like a decade ago. And so this is their debut as a tag team. It'll be interesting to see how they get on.
Aussie Open are pretty good. They're pretty big on the British wrestling scene, so that should be interesting to see how they get over.
And then we go to a singles match between Brody King and Darby Allin, which should be fun because Darby Allin is fond of murdering himself and Brody King's fond of murdering people.
Yeah, that should be really interesting as well because Darby Allin's very, very good in his character. I've seen him a few times in Evolve, so we should see maybe not. It won't be a 5-star classic or anything like that, but it'll be a really interesting match. So I look forward to seeing that.
And then for a nice change of pace, we go to David Starr versus Jonathan Gresham, which should be a really interesting tactical ground-based mat wrestling match.
Technique for days. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Gresham's one of my favourite up and coming young wrestlers, so that'll be absolutely amazing.
And then we've got the PWG World Tag Team Championship match, which will see the Rascals versus LAX versus Lucha Bros. That could be insane.
Yeah, that should be super entertaining. There'll be lots of crazy moves, lots of really cool stuff. I look forward to seeing that, and anything that Lucha Bros do, I will always check out, so that should be great.
And then the main event, kind of a hark back to the Battle of Los Angeles final from last year, which saw the final two for quite an extensive period of time being Jeff Cobb and Bandido. Jeff Cobb picked up the win that day and subsequently went on to win the Pro Wrestling Guerrilla World Championship. Bandido is now coming back to challenge Jeff Cobb for that championship, so we should get a full match between them. Bandido's super hot right now, Jeff Cobb's super hot right now. And to be honest, that's probably the best title match Pro Wrestling Guerrilla could put on right now because those two are both really, really hot. So, looks like a fun card. I just thought we'd mention it with it being Pro Wrestling Guerrilla's 200th show. They're not somebody we're going to cover on a show-by-show basis, but it's a company we both are fond of, and it's a big show for them.
Yeah, that'll be. We'll certainly check it out, and if we do check it out and get to analyze it in depth, we may talk about it on a later episode. So we will see.
So with that, I think we will move on to the final segment of the show, and this week, as we promised, our final segment will be the 1999 Royal Rumble. I believe on the last show I said the 1998 Royal Rumble, so anybody who tuned in for that, I do apologise, but trust me, this is a fun show as well.
Yeah, we sat down and watched this together as well. Just through scheduling issues, we couldn't get to watch it separately, weirdly enough, so we watched it together. This was an absolute ton of fun. It just made me realise how much things have changed now. Now, on the whole, shows are... They may be fun, but they're also very long. This didn't feel like that long a show, but
yeah, I think it was like 2 hours 50 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, but my God, was this fun! Even stuff that you would look at and you'd go, "Well, that's gonna suck," actually was way more fun and enjoyable than it had any right to be. And one of the main things that we took away from this show was, this is 1999, so we are very much in the hottest period of wrestling. So this does make sense, but my God, wasn't everybody over?
Oh, hugely.
Like
hugely.
There was people that had no right to be as over as they would come out either in the Rumble or for their normal matches and just get massive, massive pops.
So we opened with Road Dogg versus the Big Boss Man. Road Dogg came out and did his usual spiel. The crowd sang along every word with him. He was unbelievably over.
Did we mind as well.
The Big Boss Man came out to heat you've never heard before. Like, mega, mega heat. This was like the Horseman breaking Dusty's arm level of heat. It was really, really bizarre to see. I mean, I've always loved Bossman, but to see him get this much heat in 1999 for an opening match was amazing. So it was non-title for some reason. I don't know why, because Road Dogg was hardcore champion. But
Yeah, and they'd mentioned that the title had just switched a couple of weeks before. So
I think Road Dogg had beat Bossman, hadn't he?
Yeah, so it really made no sense why it wasn't a rematch.
But anyway, it was better than it had any right to be, I thought, this match. I thought it was quite fun. Bossman won with the Bossman Slam. Both guys, like we've said, were incredibly over, but they didn't do that much in the match, but everything they did, the crowd ate up. And everything they did was fun. And it was just I expected it to be a bit of a slog to get through, to be honest, because I've never been the biggest fan of Road Dogg, and Bossman has always been more about character work than he has been about in-ring performance. But I thought this was a ton of fun as a match.
Yeah, it wasn't a technical classic or anything like that, but it was really good. And in a time nowadays where opening matches, they tend to be sort of, balls to the wall, where they go crazy to get the crowd pumped up. This was sort of a little bit of a throwback, and it's kind of like, go out there, get the crowd warmed up, and then, get your stuff in, and then go. But they didn't do anything out of this world. They didn't do too much. They did their moves, and the match all made sense. There was a story to it. And by the end, I came out of the match thinking, wow, I really enjoyed that as much as any opener I've seen in quite some time. And I'm used now to seeing openers where they're a bit manic and mental on big shows, and that was just solid and great and did what it had to do. It was great to start the show.
And then I think we kind of had a little bit of a different view on the next match. It was Ken Shamrock versus Billy Gunn for the Intercontinental Championship. For me, this went far too long. It featured a massively unnecessary ref bump. It did get good for the final couple of minutes, but Shamrock tapped Billy out with the ankle lock. This really didn't do anything for me.
Yeah, I didn't love it, but I did enjoy it. I've been a big fan of Shamrock since I was a kid. I think it's particularly matches like this, when I was watching them as a kid, that I liked. I don't know what it was about Shamrock. It must have just been his character work that was so good that as a kid, I was quite into Shamrock. When he was around the IC title level, I quite liked him. For me, it was a fine match. It wasn't anything out of this world, but it was fine. Both of them were decent enough in the ring to have a good match. But it was nothing that was offensive to me. I enjoyed it. They worked over very much the leg, and that was a big part of the story, was Shamrock trying to lock in the ankle hold. And when the ankle hold came, Billy did what he should and tapped out, and that was absolutely fine.
So next up we had X-Pac versus Gangrel for the European Championship. Gangrel's entrance is really cool. I forgot how cool it was, and I love his music. X-Pac came out to a huge ovation, and watching this match just reminded me how ridiculously good and ridiculously smooth X-Pac is.
Yeah, this was a great match, wasn't it? For what was effectively, how many minutes did this go?
I want to say like 4.5. It's what it felt like.
It flew by because it was just move. X-Pac was so good at this point. I always remember the story of how supposedly way back when, if new people came into the company, Vince would put them with X-Pac, and Vince knew if you couldn't go with X-Pac and you couldn't have a good match with X-Pac, you just couldn't go, and you weren't someone that needed to be pushed. This was really good. X-Pac was crazy over at this point because he's probably one of the most, if not the most, over members of DX.
I think we're about 6 months to a year away from X-Pac heat becoming a thing.
Which is strange, isn't it? Because he was so over at this point.
It seemed to be like he won every week. He never did anything, but he just seemed to beat everyone and people he had no right beating. I think that's where that sort of thing came from. But in terms of when you look at him in the ring, he's so good. Yeah. He's so smooth.
Everything was smooth and everything was perfect. And in the end, he won with the X Factor and retained the title just as he should. And I think at this point, we're now well on the way to X-Pac it's going towards my favourite feud. It's the run to, well, not my favourite feud, sorry, but my most underrated feud, running towards X-Pac versus Shane at WrestleMania 15.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't have much time to work with here, but what time they had, they worked well. So we then moved on to, by far and away, the worst thing on the show, which was the WWF Women's Championship match between Sable and Luna, which I didn't realise. I'd looked the card up before we watched the show, but I hadn't realised this was a strap match. So when they were putting the straps on, I was like, oh God, this is going to be even worse than I thought.
It was.
It was terrible. It absolutely sucked. Strap matches always suck, but you mix that in with the quality of the workers we were looking at here, and you get a recipe for disaster. I think the story here is that Shane screwed Luna as he distracted the ref, while a woman from the crowd who looked like Tori, who would later go on to be with X-Pac and Kane.
I think we believe it was Tori, yes.
Don't know why this had to happen behind the ref's back in a strap match anyway.
Yeah, because it's all legal.
Yeah, and Shane came down with Luna, so I don't know why he was kind of screwing her. But he walked away from her as soon as the 3 count happened, so I assume that's the story we were telling here.
Either that he turned on her or that he just sort of given up on her. I am mostly not sure.
But anyway, Sable took advantage of that distraction and the assault by the woman we believe to be Tori to hit the 4th turnbuckle, because they were both tied at 3-3 at that point, and she retained the women's championship. Sable was less over than I remember her being as well, mind.
Less over, yeah, but still, I think for a female wrestler at this point, fairly over. You got to remember, this is sort of just before we're starting to really get into the swing of like divas as we remember them, and all the sort of risque stuff they started. Like Sable was pretty much the start of that, with the sort of risque stuff that they started doing with women, but it started to get worse but more popular just after this.
Yeah. So next up we had probably the most famous match from the show, which was Mankind defending his newly won at this point WWF Championship against The Rock. This was a mixed bag of awesome and uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, it's hard to watch.
You can tell The Rock is starting to get cheered as well by portions of the audience.
Very mixed.
They were clearly like watching this show. If you were watching this show in 1999, you were sitting there going, they can't keep him heel for very long.
Yeah, because you could just, even though he was doing things that were horrible and nasty, the backstage promo that he cut before he came out, you're going to come on to that, yeah. Like, I'll let you actually cover the promo itself.
All I was going to say was he cut an awesome promo before the match, and the crowd was just buying into everything he said.
Yeah, and even though he was saying things that were heelish, you came out of that promo being like, my God, he's cool.
But you know what it was as well, and we'll cover the match in a second, but when they came out and they were doing the match, there'd be times where he was beating on Foley or beating on Mankind, and the crowd would be chanting Rocky sucks, but as soon as he said anything cool on the microphone, like you can kiss the Rock's ass, the crowd would pop so big
because it's cool.
Yeah,
someone's beating the life out of you and saying, do you want to quit? And Rock's just like, nah, shove it.
But yeah, I thought the video package before this match was really cool as well. Really enjoyed that. The match is sort of frenetic and violent from the start. Loads of cool stuff intermingled with the occasional uncomfortable spots, such as Foley taking the steps, the standard way Foley takes the steps, running knees first into them, and you just think...
And he flips over them.
Yeah, no wonder this man had so much trouble walking until he got his hip replacement and his knees looked at. But there was also the bump off the balcony that was really uncomfortable as well, where he sort of takes he took it onto his hip.
Yeah, it was sort of
sideways.
It was sort of, I think he was going for almost like an elbow drop in the way he positioned.
The speakers, yeah.
But I think he just took it on his hip, and it was a really cool spot. I remember seeing that because I haven't seen this show. This is what was so fun about it. I haven't seen this show since I was probably about 14, 15.
I think it's been longer for me. I don't think I've seen the show since it happened in 1999.
Yeah, so I remember when I was a kid being like, oh, that was so cool, and all the electrics went out. Man, that's awesome. And I watch it now, and I'm 27 years old, and I'm like, yikes, that was brutal.
Yeah. The worst of the uncomfortable spots, though, were the absolute litany of unprotected chair shots to the head that Rock gave Mankind before the most obvious finish of all time, where they clearly played a tape over the sound system and the referee somehow bought it. But I did think it was a cool finish. It just was really uncomfortable watching Rock just wail on Mankind so many times.
Yeah, it's one of those things that as a kid I didn't notice, because we didn't know as much about concussions as we now do. We now know that unprotected chair shots in wrestling are a horrendously stupid thing to do, and have pretty much been outlawed amongst most sensible wrestling companies now. And every time that I see one, I sort of shudder in fear for that person. But yeah, this was it was cool, but then every single time it happened, you had this moment of like, man, that's horrendous. Yeah. But it was a really cool finish, and it was a really good match. Like, we shouldn't take that away. It was a fun match.
It was like, literally, I think my sentence at the end of my notes kind of sums it up. I just wrote, awesome match with an awesome finish. That is not as good to look at through 2019 eyes.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable now, but it doesn't take away that it's a great match. It's like watching, like, the Mizawa, Kobashi sort of
Head droppy stuff.
The head drop tag team matches.
Yeah.
Doesn't take away that they're great matches, but you know that a lot of them either can't walk very well or are dead.
Dead now, yeah.
Yeah.
So we then moved on to the main event of the evening, which was obviously the Royal Rumble. We were starting with Austin and Vince at number 1 and number 2.
The pop Austin got.
Oh, insane. The crowd lost their minds when Stone Cold came out. Anyway, Austin has a chance to eliminate Vince early on, but decides to beat him down some more. Vince then escapes, and Austin chases all the way to the back to the ladies' restroom. We had to really reinforce that this was the ladies' restroom.
Was that to make... because we did keep mentioning that, but was that to make clear how sort of desperate Vince was, that Vince couldn't care less which restroom he went into? It was just the first one that he picked.
Well, I don't know, because it was clearly a plan, because who was waiting there for Austin? The corporation. So they beat the holy hell out of Austin. Nothing much happened in the Rumble for a while, and then we saw Austin taken away on a stretcher and into an ambulance. We had a cool thing where the lights went out and Taker came out and sort of abducted Mabel. The crowd went nuts for Taker coming out.
Yeah, I loved the Ministry. I remember when I first saw them when I was a kid, I thought they were so cool and so dark. And this was... It sort of that brought a lot of that back to me as I saw all these hooded men and all these dark characters come out. I was like, man, this is cool. And then when they took Mabel away, it was just like, oh, man. Like, Taker was so cool at this point. He really was.
Speaking of cool people, the crowd lost their minds when Kane's entrance music hit as well, which happened a little later on. Kane then eliminated himself to chase down the rest of the white shirts. What was it that they used to call?
Men in white coats?
Men in white coats, whatever they were referring to them as. They had a weird tagline name for them, which I can't remember what it was.
I'd missed that.
But yeah, it was basically the men in the white coats. And he eliminated himself to chase them down, which left the ring empty for the second or third time in this Rumble.
Yeah, there was a time when Droz was literally the only guy in there at the start.
There was 2 or 3 times where there was literally nobody in the ring because Droz didn't come out until like 15 seconds after Austin and Vince had disappeared into the crowd.
What was funny though was you'd think nowadays like a live crowd would sort of turn on that a little bit. Like, can you imagine now? Like people would turn on that. Wrestling was so hot at this point that honestly the crowd didn't seem to care.
Yeah. So Vince eventually returned to commentary, and in a call back to their earlier match, which I did like, Billy Gunn came out while Shamrock was already in. He was missing a boot, but he had a brace and was limping, which I thought was really sort of cool storytelling, you know.
Little details.
We do rag on the Attitude Era a little bit, that it's not as good as we remember it being, and that the storytelling sometimes leaves a little bit to be desired, and it was more about the fact that they were just happened to be so hot and had 2 or 3 of the biggest stars of all time all at once. But I loved that little touch of Billy Gunn coming out with a brace and limping a little bit because they protected Shamrock's ankle lock so well for so long.
Yeah, we always say about the little details in wrestling. When you get those little things right that make it seem like it is actually a real thing. Yeah, that was a really cool little addition, and just it did make clear that although the Attitude Era was a lot of like crazy stuff that went on, they did still pay attention to the little details. So
the Acolytes put Mabel in a hearse. And then Austin had taken control of the ambulance and his back, and that might have been the second loudest pop on the show because the crowd just went nuts as soon as they saw Austin in the ambulance and climbing out of the ambulance.
I think we did too.
Classic Stone Cold. So Vince's facials here, can we just talk about them for a second?
It was amazing. It was both shock and horror all at once. And like if Vince had had a speech bubble coming off of his face at this point, it would have been like, what have I got to do to get rid of this guy? He'd lured him in, had him beaten up, had him taken to the hospital, and Austin had still found his way back. It makes Austin look absolutely amazing because he just will not die.
So Austin wants Vince, but there are too many members of the corporation out there at this point. I thought Hunter looked great in this for a while. But then Austin just hit a stunner and just kind of eliminated him. But I did really like Hunter's run.
I think you could see that Hunter was sort of getting up towards the position where he's in for a pretty good run. We know that Hunter would later turn heel at WrestleMania 15. And then after a little bit of being part of the corporation and the corporate ministry, he would then go on to much bigger things towards the end of 99.
Yeah. So we were then down to the final 5 of Bossman, D'Lo, Owen Hart, Austin and Vince.
It was so cool that Owen was there. I forgot Owen made it that far.
Austin dumped Owen, unfortunately. And then Bossman dumped D'Lo. Austin hit a stunner and eliminated Bossman. And finally, we got to what everybody wanted to see, Austin versus Vince. The crowd at this point was going absolutely nuts. They just wanted to see Austin destroy Vince. So they brawled everywhere. They brawled in the ring, they brawled on the floor, they brawled in the crowd. And when we got back into the ring, Austin hit a stunner, but much like earlier, where his hubris sort of caught up with him and he wanted to beat Vince down some more, he wasn't done. He didn't just toss Vince after he hit the stunner. He wanted to beat him up some more. But then who would come down to ringside but The Rock? And The Rock jaw-jacks a little bit with Austin, distracting Austin long enough to allow Vince McMahon to throw Stone Cold Steve Austin over the top rope and win the Royal Rumble.
Yeah, and can you imagine, like, today, I think we'd probably give that a lot of stick, but it was great. It really was. The live crowd absolutely sort of loved it and hated it all at once as well.
What you're saying there is basically, in theory, we should hate this.
Because a non-wrestler has won the Royal Rumble.
But in practice, it was cool. And literally my sentence at the end of my notes just says, this Rumble in theory should have sucked because the layout was so bad, but everyone was so over and the crowd was so molten, it kind of worked.
Yeah, when it's one of those things, and it's been said before, when something's hot, you almost can't mess it up. And it was one of those where wrestling was so hot at this point, it was really difficult to mess it up. Like, we talk about this, they were so hot at this point, they didn't mess it up. It's still sort of the opposite of WCW, where they were so hot, and yet somehow they did mess it up.
Yeah, so I thought there was a lot of bad on a lot of good on this show, a little bit of bad, but the most noticeable thing was just how over everyone was. Yeah,
the main thing I'll say is, you're right, there was some bad, but there was a lot of good. And the main thing that I feel and that I felt coming out of that show was, and I said this to you afterwards, I was just like, how much fun was that?
It was.
And the main thing is that it didn't take us half a week to watch it.
Yeah.
It took us a couple of hours. It was 2 hours, 45 minutes for the whole show, wasn't it?
2 hours 50, I think.
Yeah,
like that,
and it took us that long to watch it, but by the end of it, it was so much fun. It was a great show, and it just reminded me of a time in my life where wrestling was not only fun, but cool as well. And it reminded me of why it was so cool, because there was so much stuff that happened, and there was no one getting X-Pac heat, there was no one getting booed, there was nothing that the crowd hated. Everything was over, and everything was at least good.
So, anything else you want to add before we leave?
No, I don't think so. We've got our main things covered, and we'll look forward to coming back next week with our normal schedule. And we'll talk about Raw and see how they start to build towards WrestleMania, and particularly see what happens with Becky and Ronda.
Oh, I'm sorry we're out of time. We'll see you next week on the Two Man Booth.